finance meeting this is March 18th. So we all have a copy of the agenda and the attachments. I'll turn it over to John right away.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Good evening, everyone. So as you've seen in the last couple months, our report has been transforming into something with a lot more numbers, a lot different and more comprehensive look at things. We think it's in a place where we're be very useful for the next couple months, but I'm going to let Mike Weaver walk us through it. He's the primary architect along with Chairperson Janelli. So Mike, and Ken Wallace is with us. He could put it up on the screen, I think, if you'd like, Mr. Janelli. To...
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the 13-page PDF. I guess you can open that. If not, I can share my screen. How's that? Can everyone see that?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay. I have it on one screen and I have the camera on the other, so I'm not looking away. I'm just looking at the report. So, as John mentioned, this month we included a month-to-date report. I'm going to get to in a minute. It doesn't replace anything. It's just in addition to, and this really gives you a month-to-month view. So you can see any abnormalities, which this month is a good month to do it because there actually are some. This is what the report looks like. I've included the account number all the way to the left. So for those of you who don't know, if you see an account number in these reports and it begins with 1002, that's just signifying that those numbers are coming from the general fund and not the grants fund. The grants number would be 2099. So here we have starting in July through the current month, February, all the way to the right. Month by month with totals, and the third column you'll see, which is right here, is the 24 annual budget. This month, we completed the month with 13 million, we'll call it 13.7 of expense for a total of 80,802 for the year. You'll see the first two columns have about 1.0 and 3.1 million. Those are the July and August numbers. So most of our expense, which is salaries and benefits, are not loaded in there. If you look at the average of the rest of the months, we're averaging somewhere between 12.5 and 12.7 million dollars per month. So this particular month, the 13.6, we'll call it, is in line, but slightly higher than the previous month. And as I had mentioned before, and this report allows us to see some outliers. I'm just going to highlight them really quick and give you an explanation of what they are. So right here, if everyone could see, there is pupil transportation and transportation special education. Those numbers, 1.3 and 1.0 respectively, you'll see they weren't in the previous month, and that is because of timing. So we pay the bills as they come in for transportation. And in a similar manner, down below, and we'll see a little bit later, timing is also an issue when it comes to utilities for us. So last month we were missing this $2.3 million of expense. It's here in this month, and that's what's driving the month-over-month variance. But when all is said and done, we're still very close to that $12.7 million average.
Michael, if I could ask, could you kindly scroll back up to that transportation special ed?
Sure.
So basically, we should be running about 650,000 on a monthly basis.
For special ed in particular, I'm not sure there's many numbers that are in that get charged to that particular account. I can provide a breakout if you want. I did once before. I think Mr. Janelli, you and I went through that. It's about for the year for special education, it's just under $6 million for the year.
Okay, but so you mentioned that 1.3 that falls into February is because just based on timing. That is, so that would be inclusive of January as well as February's billing, correct?
Yes.
So why would December be also 1.3?
It's a matter of when the bills come in. So the 1.3 that you're talking about, this right here, could be referring
Right.
to previous month. So you'll see August, this is September and October, where there was obviously buses running, but there was no expense. So we rely as best we can for STA, who's running the public pupil transportation, to get us the bills in a timely manner. But we pay them when they come in.
So again, we're basically running a month behind then within billing as far as student special ed transportation. And on average, we're in the area of, again,
600,000, sure.
600K. All right. Thank you.
You know, Rich, to comment on here, this particular screen really depicts the way they pay their bills on a cash basis. When you look at the year to date, what's not paid or what is sort of in the pipeline to be paid is in the encumbrance column. So that's why over here you have some distortions. It's just, I asked them to put the monthly on, so it does pick up some blurbs that you could explain, but it's more for referential treatments. The full picture is when you get to the year to date, which includes the actual expenditure plus the applications we have identified.
And if you would be kind enough to go to slide 2. So if I remember correctly, the encumbrance from January was about 256. So we basically lost 200K, or 200K in addition was expensed against the unencumbered balance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you picked up, the thing to note is with the additional appropriation as noted on the bottom, that came in from the city for the request for the cyber and the Mike, if you would go to the other screen, which shows the summary of the cyber and the special ed cost, it sort of reinstates that balance, Richard, to about 652.
Yeah, the additional appropriations here I have, and they tie out on the other sheets as well, but 602,274 is the exact number additionally.
Yeah, if you go to the next, that's it. You'll see it here. The budget is the 150, and then the 602 is the additional appropriation. And if you go to the extreme right, you'll see the two numbers, the 52 and the 602. So you're right, Richard. Without that additional appropriation that was requested from the city, we'd be in a tight position, to put it mildly.
We're also going to bleed into that 602 pretty quick too.
You're right. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a rosy picture, but it's a lot better looking at 602 than it is at 52.
Right, but that additional appropriation, is it tied directly to technology, or could it be used as far as general funding, operating expenses?
This is all commingled. In other words, the other expenses that you got the 602 for, there's already been, you're mixing everything in into sort of a mixture. So the 602 is just replacing dollars that we have either expended or accrued for. So it's more of this a one-to-one relationship, I guess, to answer your question. That it is what we went to City Hall for, saying that we had extra cost this year because of these mandates. So these this particular money replaces what the extra cost that we anticipated either spent, had spent, or have encumbered to spend. So it keeps us somewhat whole. But it is a problem. It is a one-time expenditure. So again, creates a problem for us the next year as to where we get the money from. John, if you want to go down to some of these year-to-date numbers, and if anybody has any questions on any of these expenses, there, I noticed in the sheets that you sent, you had highlighted certain expenses that offset each other with large positives and large negatives.
And Rich, if I could just jump in here for a second, you do see a new column, the month-to-date actual. That's a change from previous reports. I think it's helpful.
Yes, Rich, the natural gas, electric, the year-to-date balance that you're referring to is right here. And again, we did have between natural gas and electric, there was another timing issue where we did not receive the invoices for prior months that we did this month, and we paid them current.
I apologize. Scroll back, Michael. My
Sure.
fault. Stop, slow.
Natural gas is the $129,000 favorable and $678,000 favorable.
I mean, wow. It doesn't, the numbers kind of don't make sense to me, and I apologize, but if we spent 100 and within natural gas, if we spent 182K in February, our year to date has only been 385, so we've only received one other bill for another 182,000.
Natural gas and electric are two, I guess you'd say, unique accounts in that natural gas expense is it's not linear. It's kind of cyclical with the weather, so that would be reflective of our heating. And electric would be a similar situation where you'd see typically higher electric in the summer months for cooling. So yes, so far we did have, you're correct, lower than expected natural gas expense.
Right, and it's been a warmer than usual winter. That's one of the reasons. Also, prices have come down since we put these budgets together now 14 months ago. And you might recall when we adopted the budget for next year, several of those utility lines we dropped. We're budgeting less next year because of the price decreases.
Very good, thank you.
And here again, we see the additional appropriation of the 602,000 down below the grand totals. And just to point out what they were being spent on, the 202,000 under equipment general was for the information technology that related to the July breach. That is including both the deductible and some additional hardware and software we had to buy. And then the three numbers above it, the 140, the 244, and the 16, those numbers that we asked for were in relation to the new special education mandate The 202,000 has been expensed, so those actual expenses are in the year-to-date actual, whereas the special education, some of them are in the year-to-date actual, some of them we haven't realized yet, and they're still in the encumbrance lines.
Again, when I look at these numbers, I look at that bottom number. It's a sort of a forecast as to, like you were pointing out, Richard, here we are, 650, whatever it is, 652, and we've got 5 more months left, to go, um, plus some unknown stuff that we'll talk about later. So that becomes a very relevant number. The other stuff, the mix in between is the variance is how good your budgeting is versus, basically where you're coming in with the actual expenses. But,
Okay.
before we got that appropriation, not the appropriation, before we got that extra 600,000, I was really concerned. There's no way that, we'd be going back to the city for more money right away with the 50 some odd $1,000 that we had, um, that we had left. And the reason it has to be explained this way with the 150 versus the 602, because there was a period of time a year or two ago when you take the difference of 1 year over the other, if you don't separate it like that, you combine it, it gives a misleading difference in the years. Our budget is $150 million, and so any increase next year we get over that would be over the 150, not the 150 $1,600,000. Again, we're trying to refine. I've asked John and Mike to refine the statement with more of a narrative that goes into explaining some of the details, explaining that a lot of the monthly figures are based on the cash, so we have a better feel for the workings of the numbers, so that it has a little bit more meaning to us once we're looking at it and talking about it.
So kind of in closing or in summary, if I could ask, is this correct? So we've got 53 in the general budget or operating budget, right? We basically have 400K in the additional appropriation because that 202 for equipment general has already been invoiced and paid. So in effect, we've got $453,000 as basically a surplus to survive for 4 months or 5 months. Is that correct?
No, why would you take 4 and not 6?
But the 202's already been paid.
So we're just getting reimbursed for it. That the fact that it was paid, it sort of put us in the negative. So all they're doing is giving us back that money. So it created a negative. We're just reinstating that negative.
Okay. So actually better position than February then.
Yeah, very much so. As I said, without that appropriation, things would be more difficult than what they look to be.
Okay.
All right. You want to move on?
The last pages I have in here, these have been there traditionally the way we've reported them. I believe last month I began to, this will be the second month, to just sort these grants by the total budget. So having the larger ones show first. There's about 2 pages of them, and then a summary down again on the bottom. 58 of the 58 million in the budget column, there's 9.54 remaining as a favorable variance. Some of these grants are annual and will expire, but there are other ones you'll see. Even some of the ones we have listed here have C/O, which is a carryover. So some of these variances are carryover variances from year to year.
Let me ask you, on the grants, on the budget number you have for the budget, is that what the grant is is eligible for, or is it based on a cash receipts that you've received so far for the grant?
It's the first one, Rich. That's the award.
The award? Okay. And then, are all of these grants um, susceptible to being renewed? Or is there, I guess what I'm getting at, are there any grants in here that are just for 1 year and go away the next year? I don't mean if they'll
Ri-
go away if you don't apply for it,
yeah.
but are they just eligible for 1 year?
Rich, I could answer that a little bit. This is a
Sure.
mix. When I'm looking at it, there's a mix of yearly grants, grants that we apply for every year, and then there's a mix in there of competitive grants, meaning they're not guaranteed. You have to apply for them every year, and it's based on it's a competitive funding grant. So the list here doesn't necessarily delineate which ones those are. Like, for example, we get our Alliance District funding every year. That's pretty much guaranteed. The amount, not so much, but the fact that
Sure.
we'll get it so long as we, complete all the paper and the grant application every year that gets done. ESSER 2 is going away. Title 1 is anything that says title in front of it is an entitlement grant. So that's coming from the federal government, and that's based on our poverty rate. There's a couple in here, like I believe the immigrant grant is a competitive grant that Augusto Gomes applies for every single year. Luckily, we've been getting that every year. If that goes away, then there's some staff members in there. But most of this is our entitlement grants and grants that are generally reliable, but it's interspersed with grants that are competitive, that are not necessarily reliable from year to year.
Would it be of any value to asterisk those grants that we call competitive grants? So that at some point, if we wanted to have an idea as to what is, we may or may not have the next year on a competitive basis.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we could definitely categorize them. It's super helpful to look at it that way. Just real quick, the one in the middle, ARPA Right to Read, that's kind of a one-time grant. So that's
Mhm.
going away. Wasn't necessarily competitive. Well, that one was competitive, but
Yeah.
yeah, we can definitely categorize those for easier analysis.
Okay, all right, thank you. And again, just for everybody's purpose, all of the expenditures against this do not reflect anything in the operating budget that we previously looked at. This is a separate accounting and separate charges, right, John?
Yes,
Right.
I'm wondering, Rich, if this might be the time to talk about our strategy for getting to June 30th that involves both these grants we're looking at and the relatively low budget balance we saw in the general fund.
Sure.
This be a time to bring it up, do you think?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So what we're in the process of doing is so far there are 5 action steps that we've taken or are in the process of taking. And remember, we had asked the city to release $3 million from our reserves, and that's still pending. In the meantime, we've tried to look at anywhere we can to find alternative sources of money, including some of these grants I'll describe in a second, as well as some operating decisions that our new interim superintendent has led us to. So let me just describe them. And if you go up, Mike, if you could just go up to the top of the grant page for a minute, you'll see that very second grant. That's the ESSER 3. That's the fiscal cliff. You can see what we had this year, $10 million we were using. But there's 1.8 million that is unencumbered. And when we looked closer at that, what we found was those were approvals we asked for various supply items, primarily PPE, personal protective equipment, but also some school supplies and things like that 3 years ago, we thought we would need all of it, but as the pandemic went on, we did not. So last week, we submitted an amendment to the state ed department that would take, that would use that 1.8 million to help, uh, I'll use the term, balance our budget this year. We asked the state if we could use 1.4 million for salaries that are in the general fund budget right now, and another $380,000 for copiers and printers. You've heard a lot about that the last couple months. It was an item we had hoped to get financed in our capital budget and did not, but we desperately need them. But you could, for this conversation, we think we found 1.4 million that we can apply towards that $3 million ask we made of the city council. So that ask now comes down. Right underneath that, you'll see, I'm sorry, the Title I FY24, that actually represents a carryover amount from the previous year. And on our own authorities, we could take teachers who would otherwise qualify as, I'll call them Title I teachers, meaning they work in Title I schools, doing the things that's allowable in the grant. And we've made an adjustment this month to take teachers out of the budget and put them into the grant. So the second of our action steps is we found about $480,000 in that Title II grant. So between the two, those first two action steps, 1.8, almost 1.9 million, I'll say it this way, to apply to that $3 million ask that is pending. And we had told the city, the ad hoc last time we met, we were going to try these steps, hoping they'd work, but this was part of our discussion with them. The third action step we see, you wouldn't see on the page here, Kara put in what I'll call an early closeout of our program and school expenditures. We asked all of our principals, program people, to put in their orders for the rest of the year. Even though it's March, things that would happen in June, we want you to ask from now or forever hold your peace. And so spending here in the school district, for all intents and purposes, has stopped. I'll call that an austerity measure that we're taking to, again, help with the ask. We've also implemented what we call a soft freeze on hiring. We're not hiring any new positions unless they're absolutely essential, maybe replacements for key personnel or things like that. So we call that also a soft freeze, but that should generate hopefully some balances by the end of the year. We're not sure how much. That's the third action step. The fourth action step is in process, and we're doing the same thing we did in the first one, where instead of the ESSER III grant, we're going to look at our Alliance grant. That was the very first one up on the page. I don't know, Mike, if you want to just go back to that. You'll see at the top of the grants, right? You'll see a bigger unencumbered balance right now, but it's March. You can see more than $2 million there. We're going to ask the state if we can amend that grant. We think there's some things we can do without, and pick up what we think could be another $1 million out of that grant. If that's successful, those four strategies should give us the $3 million that we originally asked for the reserve. But the caution is it's still only March. We have probably another third of the school year to go through and things happen as you go along. So what we'd like to do is if things get a little, when things get a little closer to April, May and June, if it looks like there are more negatives than positives, then reactivate our request for the reserve drawdown on a, call it only on an as needed basis. At that point, we'd be saying to the city, we've done everything else we can. These are real expenses that we need, not money we take and use for something else. But that would be a last choice. So I think with those 5 strategies, we should be okay. And right now, I think the first 4 should get us to the finish line.
At what point do you get a definitive answer?
Yeah. When do
Yeah.
you know?
So
That's-
when we amended the ESSER grant earlier in the year, we got an answer within a couple of days. I looked today, we have not. It's hard to say. I know they're very busy up there at the State Ed Department. What they did not give us, sometimes when they look at it, they send back questions or they refer it back to you to do some more analysis or work. They have not done that. They have not said anything about it. So I think that's encouraging. I think it's just a matter of maybe they haven't gotten to it yet.
All right. Any other questions on the financials?
Uh, what, um, what happens if we don't get it?
Then
I
we're
think
up to 3.
Well, I'd also think at that point, we'd reactivate the reserve drawdown requests that we have.
Okay. Thank you.
I think the next item was
Got it?
the audit. There's been so much conversation and controversy on this audit, and I asked John to finally bring us up to date because it's kind of hard to understand what the newspapers are saying, and everybody's pointing a finger at somebody else. So I asked John to give us an understanding as to where we are, that is the Board of Ed, where we stand in terms of our obligations toward the city for the audit for 620, for 22 and for 23. He'll explain the schedule, what it means.
Right. But before we look at that page, and that's a page from the auditor's dashboard that we look at, and it keeps track of how things are coming along. But and some of you have heard this before, but I think it's important. A city or a town's audit firm is hired, engaged is the official word, to complete 3 tasks. The first task is a very thin report called the single audit. It's a report's been around for at least 40 years, and it provides 2 lists in it. One is a list of all the federal money that has come up to the city. And it's not just for education. There'll be money from the Department of Agriculture, Homeland Security, let me just give you a couple of these. The U.S. Treasury has programs. They're pretty extensive, and a lot of them, here they are. I'm sorry. The Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, the Institute of Museum and Library Services even, and so on. So that's one of the 2 lists. And then the second list is a list of state grants that originate with state money, such as Alliance and some of those things, as well as the state aid that comes either for, from the casinos or for ECS and things like that. But it's two lists they put together. It was done many months ago. The second thing that they do is every school district, public school district in Connecticut, at the end of August has to prepare a report on the year just finished. It's called the EFS report. And what we do is we combine what we've spent from the budget with what we've spent from grants, with what the city has done for us, maybe some other things. And we show the state, when you combine those, what we really spent on everything. In our case, it's close to $200 million, 150 in the budget, and maybe 40 in the grants, or 50, something like that. That report has to be audited and sent to the state ed department by December of the year that's just completed. Now, RSM, the city's auditors, hasn't even started the 2023 audit. So we, again, this year hired a separate auditor just to do that report so that it would get to the state ed department on time. They use it for statistics. It doesn't carry any state aid, but it's a mandate that you have to do. So that second report is done. The third thing is the city's annual report. Sometimes it's called the audit, but it's their annual report. And what happens is it's put together by the city finance department, and then the auditors come and check it. And there are parts of it that we feed into the city finance department. I won't go into all the complexities, but that's the report that these days is called the audit that's being done. Now, when you look at what's on the screen there, as I said, that's the dashboard. We can go in and look at that anytime. And when you print it out like I did, the headings at the top don't print, so I had to write those in. But you can see there's 4 rows. The first 2 rows are for us, Board of Ed fieldwork and Board of Ed planning. The next 2 rows are the city's fieldwork and planning, and they're different columns. Outstanding means that you still have not submitted anything in response to what the auditors have looked for. And they'll send their requests electronically. We'll get an email to go in here and see what they're looking for. So you can see under outstanding, there's nothing for us to submit. We're talking this afternoon. It's at least the 4th time that we've had a couple zeros there. We think it might be more than that, but it's this I did yesterday or the day before, and you could see we've submitted everything. Once you submit it, it's called fulfilled, and you can see some numbers there. Now, the actual request could be multiple. I think we're up to, is it number 108, Mike, if I'm not mistaken? It's well
Higher
over
than that.
Yeah, the city's
John?
up over 200. Although
John, excuse me,
Yep.
just for the sake of time, I think the point is this dashboard covers the period of 22, is that correct?
that's right.
And
Year end in June.
looking at the column for the Board of Ed, the 2 buckets here, you're saying the outstanding, there's nothing outstanding for the 2 categories that fieldwork or audit requests are made, correct?
Right. They've returned one thing. We were told, I'll say in a minute, that who we were told by, but that's really a city item that was on our list. So we don't think there's anything we should be doing at this point. And
So
you could
is it safe to say that based on this dashboard, and there's nothing outstanding, and the item that's returned and deemed late is up for conversation for you to clarify, is that correct?
right, it's the same item.
The
Right.
same item?
Yep.
Okay, so.
Rich, my apologies for interrupting. I see Teresa has her hand up.
Right. My question is, and this I heard from the city, a couple things they're waiting from the Board of Ed for their documents to be finished. Is that correct?
Well, according to this, Teresa, I mean, I'm not gonna answer for John, but that's why if he's got this dashboard and says it's as of the last couple of days, then there's nothing else except this one item that I suspect that he's in conversation with them to clarify. So whatever you've heard, I don't know what you've heard, and I go back to saying it's a rumor, and that's why I asked John to put this out to us so that we have something factual on it, as opposed to dealing with rumors.
No, but I mean, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, that their documents are predicated on information they need to get from us.
I could say this, every time they ask us for something, we promptly give it to them.
That's the
Don't
city. I'm talking
delay.
about the
Yeah,
city
yeah,
to complete their documents. Like they threw out the term trial balances. Are our trial balances all up to date and all that stuff?
we've given them dozens of trial balances, versions, going back at least a year. They may say to us, oh, we want to show something differently, make this journal entry. Well, what's going on is when you put together a financial report, you put it together two ways. One way is called a budget basis, and the other way is called a GAAP basis, generally accepted accounting principles. We deal in the world of the budget basis, and all other town departments do. You saw that tonight in the report. We show you what we've gotten, what we've spent, what's left over. If there's something at the end of the year, it goes back to them. When the auditors come in, they show results that way, but they also recast everything. And it's really for investors in our bonds and Wall Street types. And they take our statements and they put them on an accrual basis, where if you had a bill that was for June, but you didn't pay it until July, they're not going to show that as an expense of June. Whereas we just show it as something that hasn't been paid. And it's in the process of recasting everything that went on during a year into a more of a corporate balance sheet and income statement that they ask us for information, and we give it back as quickly as we can. That's the issue.
So Teresa, I don't know, basically I don't pay attention to what I've heard if it's not in the source, and I'm not in John's position, but with all the stuff that's going on, this, as he called it, is the dashboard. As far as I can see, there's only one item that he has to clarify, and that's this top item. And regardless of what you heard, and he says this is updated as of a couple of days ago. So
I was talking with somebody in the finance department,
yeah,
and I'm not going to say names. And this
fine.
is
The finance department is not running the audit. It's a public accounting firm who runs the audit. And I can honestly say, at this late stage of the game, usually trial balances is the very first thing on the first day that they ask you for. So they wouldn't be waiting this late. But I think that's John's, determination to find out what this one item is and clarify it. But as far as I can see and what they furnish on this dashboard, which is a status, we've got a clean bill of health, and just to get, we got enough problems rather than go back and forth to,
well, something's wrong for it to last this long. It was supposed to end in November, and it's still ongoing.
I'm not disputing that. I'm not disputing that. I have no idea the reasons for it. I'm just looking for, as of today, March 18th, what's the status of what the Board of Ed, the 622, owes the public accounting firm. And according to this, what's published by them is one item, and John says it's in dispute, or he's gonna find out. So why it took so long is beyond me. I couldn't begin to answer the question. But to their point, to the Board of Ed's point, to John's point, he took the initiative and was proactive on the 23 audit to get some of that work done. And apparently last year or whenever, they hired a public accounting firm to audit the other segment of the information that was necessary. So at least they wouldn't be behind when they're furnishing the 623 information. But again, this is for 622, right, John?
It is.
Yeah.
And what the city has done, you might have read about it. It might be 3 weeks now. They've hired a second public accounting firm, a company called Clifton Larson Allen. They are the largest municipal accounting firm in Connecticut. They have 58 cities and towns that they audit, compared to RSM has 8. But when you have 58 of the 169, 1 out of every 3 towns uses Clifton Larson, formerly Bloom Shapiro. And what they're doing is they've stepped in to be the project manager, and we'll meet with them along with city officials once a week. We have a meeting Tuesday mornings, and they'll direct anybody into what should happen next to get to the finish line. They're the people we asked to explain this returned item. We said, tell us what it is. We don't understand it. We thought they said it involves the city's books, but we've asked for help there. So they're moving things. They really have been a catalyst to spark this thing and to move it along. But it's very different when you have 2 competitors working on the same project.
Any other questions on this? Okay. Then the next item is for discussion purposes. We've had several discussions on Kelly Services, and I just wanted for conversation purposes to look at the information provided. It has nothing to do with finances or the financial cost. We could get into that at a later date. It's just a eye-opener as to the number of positions that are being filled. I think that was very important to start with, and prompts a question to me as to why, how does this relate to perhaps pre-COVID times, as well as knowing what's coming down the pike in a couple of weeks relative to our appropriations. How do we put some controls on here? So if you go to that schedule, John can explain it, or
Yeah,
yeah.
Ken Wallace, do you want to put that PDF up we sent around late in the afternoon? Did you get an email from me about 3:30 today? Had an attachment? Okay. That's it. Yes, please. Right. Okay. So this was a page from a report, Kelly Services. They come in, we meet with them pretty regularly. This was a comparison. They did 6 months through January. And that's what I think we want to talk about, Rich, right? Where it shows last year and this year, shows positions that they've filled, vacancies, I should say, they filled, vacancies that were unfilled, a fill rate. for last year, for this year, and then the top part of the page, they break out some different categories. The administrative is not administrators. Those are folks that work in administration, one shape or other. And then the bottom orange bar is a month-to-month comparison where you see the filled, unfilled, and the fill rates. And then a little bar over to the right, the black page, they're pointing out they filled 16.8%. The rate has gone up and the more assignments have been filled, 2,062 than a year earlier.
To me, what was important when I learned of this service, in addition to the cost, which we haven't got into, I was just trying to figure out what they really what they do, and what positions they hire for, and then this is what John was able to come up with. It's hard for me to interpret what these numbers mean. I see for the prior year, 13,000 positions. I don't know if that's a normal situation or it's abnormal. I'd like to compare it to pre-COVID. Also, when you have 10,000 out of the 13,000 positions that are in the category of teachers, you know, I would ask why there's so many positions that have to be filled for substitutes for teachers. And when you compare it to the year to date that they have currently, and it just goes through January, you're looking at 3,000 so far. So it's a lot of positions that may have reasons for it, and there's a cost involved in here, which again we'll deal with at a later time. It's one of the things I had requested initially. Some of the reports
So-
we have, but
I think I was,
sure, but it's, and that's why I asked Kim to be on the call tonight, so she could explain, you know, whether this is normal, abnormal, and
Right.
equally as important as what can we do looking ahead, being proactive to next year, if we're paying, if not if we're paying for this, you know, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for this. What is this? What are some of the thought processes that we can do, cap certain things here? So Kim, that's why, you know,
Right.
I asked you.
okay. So I guess let me take a step back because this is actually just one page of it was probably a 30-page year-over-year summary report that Kelly Ed presented to us. So let me see if I can provide a little context around this because I think it is hard to understand just from this one page. So if you took a look back pre-pandemic, we had maybe about 100 less teachers than we have now. We were filling substitutes at a rate that was about the national average in terms of sick days and that kind of things for our teachers. And we did not have a lot of para absences. And the ones we did, we didn't have a sub pool for. So in other words, if we had paraprofessionals that were out, often those positions just were left uncovered pre-pandemic. What we saw post-pandemic was a dramatically different picture, where we had a lot of difficulty finding substitutes to fill the role. There just were not a lot of people out in the workspace that were interested in filling that role. And so we cobbled together, not all that successfully, a pool of subs that was probably about 50 or so that worked consistently. We need, with a population our size, particularly of teachers, we need about 225 subs or 250 subs in the pool who are available to work, to take sick absences or something, to be at a level between 80 and 90% filled at any given time. And to quantify that, on a busy day, that would have been about 125 teachers out. When we hit the pool that was decimated post-pandemic, we faced some real challenges with trying to build that pool up. We also had we were coming out of a period of time where there were a lot of absences across all positions. There were people that were working remotely who had illnesses. And so we were clawing our way back. What we needed to do was we needed to elicit help with not only bolstering our pool, but getting a pool of people that actually would work. And one of the suggestions was to use a company like Kelly because they had a workforce that was going into buildings, it was going office buildings, it was going into office settings, it was also going into schools in the Kelly Ed component. And they had access to a lot of people who wanted to sub across this geographic area. It could include Brewster, it could include parts of West or Eastern New York. It included parts of northern Litchfield County and around our area extending out to Newtown. We negotiated with Kelly Ed. They agreed to come in, and what they do is they essentially take over our sub process. So they purchase for us our platform. So they pay frontline platform folks for the program, the ASAP program. So they pay this cost of that. They pay the subs, and they also pay the payroll tax that goes along with those subs. So anything that gets paid to the government, they cover unemployment and they cover workers' comp. They cover all of those insurance pieces, and they also offer to their substitutes a very basic rudimentary insurance policy, health insurance policy. So for a premium that was about 30%, they assumed all of those costs. What we saw is it took them, as it did most of our competitors, it took them about 6 to 8 months to get a pool back up and running that was working. During that time, so this is about 18 months ago, it was a very, very difficult time to be a teacher in this district. People would be out sick and there was no sub coverage. Colleagues were asked to cover other people's classes. Students didn't have supervision, and morale, in addition to the poor morale that was being created by the COVID problem, there was also a real crisis within the buildings of teachers not feeling that they could get a day when they were sick and not feeling like someone was going to take care of their class while they were out. Sick rates were not really any more than they were pre-pandemic. They returned to a basic level that still hovers just under the national average for sick outs. And our pool of teachers was slightly larger. Now, some other things happened during this period of time to drive up cost. One is that the minimum wage went up twice. So now minimum wage is $16. And also we had a tremendous number of paraeducator vacancies. Back in the day, pre-pandemic, I think we had 14 or 15 para subs. We couldn't cover much at all. Now, what you can see in this list is there are quite a few para subs, and we're covering as many as 2,000 para sub vacancies in a year. So that means a para educator gets sick and goes out, now has someone who can substitute cover. The other thing we saw is that the fill rates started to go up. So if you compare 22-23 to 23-24, the fill rates that were hovering at just about half are now shooting back up to where we saw them pre-pandemic, 72. We've got some buildings that are in the high 80%. So we were able to restore that level of filling vacancies to pre-pandemic. It was slightly higher because we had slightly more teachers. But you can see if you add together, or if you look at that total column in the middle of the screen at the bottom there, where it says total 11,076 for 22-23 for this same period of time as now, 11,356. That means that we did about 300 more vacancies this year than we did last year. In the big scheme of things, it's a rounding error. It's not a lot of people. It's not a lot of spots. So we're doing about the same. Minimum wage is going up a little bit. The other thing that we did is that this year we made a pretty dramatic commitment to professional development. A lot of it was centering around our core. Our teachers needed some time excused from their classes to do the professional development. So we built into grant funds enough money to do that extra substituting so that we could get our teachers out, get them this training, and it didn't hit the general fund. So with that said, I think we're probably actually running better this year than we were last year in terms of how many vacancies that are dedicated to really true sick, personal days, those kinds of pieces, because we've got the sub numbers built in here for professional development. And what Kelly Ed does is when they bill us, they send us an itemized bill so we can see how many special ed subs we used. We could see how many professional development subs we used. So all said, we are running about where we were last year. I think the increases that we're seeing in the budget are in part and parcel because of these small adjustments that are being made over time. And so to deal with, Richard, your question about what do we do in a crisis? Well, there's two choices next year, the way that I see it. One is that we provide less sub coverage. So one of the things we could do is we could say, gee, building X, you are only going to get 100 slots for this year. And when that 100th slot is gone, there's no more sub coverage for you. That will restore us to the level of morale we saw before we were able to get the fill rates back up. And not to be underestimated. These are teachers who are stretched thinly already and now are worried about whether they can be out sick for a day because of sub coverage. So that's one option. And that's probably the best option, is to shut it off. The second option is, do we save anything by bringing in this sub back in-house again? And we took a really close look at those metrics. And when you put back in the cost of buying the ASOP service, we would need 2 full-time staff members with benefits to run it. Right now, Kelly gives us a team. So they have 1 full-time liaison, and then they have a staff of recruiters and a staff of onboarders and a manager who meets with us every other week, and we look at metrics. So we would have to bring that operation back in-house, and we would have to also assume liability for unemployment insurance, workers' comp insurance, if we, wanted to try to stay competitive with some kind of rudimentary benefit plan or not. So when we start to look at those costs, the margin for Kelly Ed in particular is very low. And I think it would be probably a net neutral to bring it back in. It would require us to staff up to be able to run it again. So that's kind of the overview. As I said, my team and I look with Kelly Ed every other Wednesday. We look at metrics, we look at building specific subs, we look at spikes and outliers, we look at trends, and we're about on track. The last piece, and then I'll stop talking. The last piece that's really significant here is this. We put a focus in year 1 on elementary schools, and we were able to drive up the fill rate in elementary schools and drive down the absenteeism. This year, it was some middle schools, but mostly the high school. For the last several years at the high school, in order to provide coverage when a teacher was out at the high school, if we did not have a full day sub at $140 a day, we had to use period coverage. And period coverage means $35 a period paid to my colleague who's now going to take my 1 period class for that day. So it would not be unusual to string together period coverage from the existing faculty and to spend $240, $270 a day on sub coverage because there was not a 1-person Kelly Ed person to go in for $140 a day. When I looked at it, we were spending about $250,000 a year in period coverage up at the high school. I looked at numbers up to today, and right now we are running on trend to $39,000. So we are filling at the rate we're filling here, but we have exponentially driven down the cost of period coverage at the high school. Again, that's a credit to Kelly Ed having available subs, being able to put in those day subs to cut the costs, and being able to coordinate with the high school to make sure that the absences are covered in the least expensive way possible. So for all of those reasons, I think that I don't think that casting aside Kelly Ed I think that's penny wise and pound foolish. I don't think it's going to save us any money. It may actually cost us money to staff up to cover it. But if we're concerned about the numbers of vacancies and just not being able to cover them in a course of a year, I think our only recourse is going to be to set a cap. And that's going to have some real ramifications for morale. But to be honest, with the kinds of cuts we're talking about, I think we're going to have a lot of issues like that.
Thanks, Kim. One question, in terms of capping, if you go that route, what impact does it have on the students? Where do they go? What do they do?
So I would think certainly at the high school, that means they're going into a big gym or a big auditorium for study hall, where we only have, 1 or 2 subs that can watch a large group of kids. At the elementary level, it means that we aren't going to have substitutes that can provide prep time coverage for teachers that are out. So kids that ordinarily might be at art or music, if we have a vacancy there that is uncovered, the teachers who have those kids during the day aren't going to be able to get their prep time. So there are contractual costs to that. And we may end up, because by contract, we're prohibited from merging classes together, even in an emergency. Putting 50 kids in one class obviously is not an option. So those students might be in the media center, sitting with a paraeducator. We won't be able to provide any coverage just to watch those children because we aren't going to have enough staff to do it.
This is quite complicated. Since I've been on the board, this is brand new to me because I think this was enacted here in the last 2 years. And so I just wanted some background. As I said, when I looked at the numbers I have, to me, it looked like a lot, but it has a lot of implications. And I think it's a good starting point for the conversation for us to have a little bit more of an understanding under our belt before we go into it a little bit further. So I thank you.
Sure. I was just gonna say, the other way you can look at these numbers too is if you figure, if you look at that column, so the total number, 11,356 slots that are total slots that were available. If you figure we have about 1,000 teachers, that's 10 absences and the numbers are a little bit off because it's not including the paras, but let's say it's 8 or 9 absences for a teacher in a year. Well, those teachers have 14, 15 sick days and 3 personal days a year. That gives you some sense that you've got teachers, particularly who are running under the national average of sick time. You've got teachers coming in, and so it's really, when you think of the volume or the size of our district, it's not an exorbitant amount of coverage.
Right. Okay. And that's why I had asked you to be here because, the numbers don't mean anything unless you have an understanding too. And it is complex when you say, as you described, with all of the covering, 6 of one, half a dozen the other, you're going to be paying for it some way.
That's right.
So that's also a factor. Does anybody else have any questions on this issue? Nope. I can't see it, but Kate, do you see anybody else having a hand up?
I don't see anybody, Rich.
No, okay. That being the case, I think.
Rich Hawley, did you have something?
No questions here. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I think that completes the agenda. If there are no other questions, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Make your motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Thank you,
very much.
Richard. Thank you, team.